War, in its brutal calculus, reduces human beings to targets and statistics. It is a realm where survival depends on the swift and merciless elimination of the enemy, where hesitation can mean death, and where the lines between right and wrong are often blurred by smoke and fire. But on a cold December day in 1943, above the war-torn skies of Germany, two soldiers from opposing sides faced a choice that transcended this brutal arithmetic. Their story, one of incredible mercy, profound honor, and an enduring friendship forged in the crucible of combat, remains a powerful testament to the unextinguishable spark of shared humanity that can flicker even in the darkest of times. It is a narrative that challenges our very understanding of warfare, reminding us that the enemy is always a human being. To understand the magnitude of the encounter, one must first understand the men involved. In the left seat of the B-17F Flying Fortress heavy bomber, nicknamed Ye Old Pub, 21-year-old Second Lieutenant Charles "Charlie" Brown of Weston, West Virginia, was living a profound nightmare. December 20th, 1943, was his first combat mission, a maximum-effort bombing run targeting the heavily defended Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen. Brown was the picture of a young American officer, steady, reliable, and burdened with the immense responsibility for the 9 other men in his crew. He was a farm boy at heart, thrust into the vast, impersonal machinery of a global war, navigating a billion-dollar weapon through a storm of steel. Meanwhile, at a Luftwaffe airfield in Germany, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, a 28-year-old fighter ace, prepared for another sortie. Stigler was a professional, a skilled and experienced pilot with 27 victories to his name. He was just a few kills away from earning the Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors, a recognition that promised prestige and perhaps a brief respite from the Eastern Front. But Stigler was not a Nazi ideologue. He was a warrior from an older, almost extinct school of chivalry. He had learned to fly in the pre-war Luftwaffe, an organization that still held on to romantic notions of aerial combat as a duel between knights of the sky. His eldest brother, August, a fellow pilot, had been killed earlier in the war, and another brother was serving in the Wehrmacht. Franz fought not for a twisted ideology, but for his country, for his comrades, and for his own survival. He was deeply influenced by the stern words of his former commander, Gustav Rodel. Early in the war, Rodel had gathered his pilots and delivered a lesson that would become Stigler's moral compass. "You follow the rules of war for you, not for your enemy," Rodel had stated. "You fight by rules to keep your humanity." He then delivered a chillingly personal warning. "If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." This code of honor, this insistence on humanity amidst the inhumanity of total war, was etched into Stigler's soul. These two men, one a novice bomber pilot from the hills of West Virginia, the other a seasoned fighter ace from Bavaria, were on a collision course, their fates about to be irrevocably intertwined by violence and then by grace. The mission to Bremen was, from the start, a bloodbath. For the Allied bomber crews, the air over Germany was known as the Bloody Hundredth for a reason. As Ye Old Pub and its formation began their bomb run, they were met with a relentless storm of black puffs of flak that filled the sky, shaking the massive planes like toys. Then came the fighters. Swarms of German Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s dove through the formations, their cannons and machine guns blazing. Ye Old Pub was savaged. The 10-man crew fought back with desperate courage, but the onslaught was too much. A direct hit from anti-aircraft fire shattered the plexiglass nose. Seconds later, cannon shells from a fighter walked down the fuselage. Shrapnel tore through the thin metal skin of the aircraft. One of the 4 massive Wright Cyclone engines was knocked out completely, its propeller feathered. A second engine was streaming thick black smoke and running rough, losing precious power. The delicate oxygen. The mission to Bremen was, from the start, a bloodbath. For the Allied bomber crews, the air over Germany was known as the Bloody Hundredth for a reason. As Ye Olde Pub and its formation began their bomb run, they were met with a relentless storm of black puffs of flak that filled the sky, shaking the massive planes like toys. Then came the fighters. Swarms of German Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s dove through the formations, their cannons and machine guns blazing. Ye Olde Pub was savaged. The 10-man crew fought back with desperate courage, but the onslaught was too much. A direct hit from anti-aircraft fire shattered the plexiglass nose. Seconds later, cannon shells from a fighter walked down the fuselage. Shrapnel tore through the thin metal skin of the aircraft. One of the 4 massive Wright Cyclone engines was knocked out completely, its propeller feathered. A second engine was streaming thick, black smoke and running rough, losing precious power. The delicate oxygen system, essential for high-altitude flight, was destroyed, forcing Brown to descend into thicker, breathable air, where German flak and fighters were even more lethal. The damage was catastrophic. The hydraulic system was shot away, meaning the landing gear and brakes would be useless upon landing. The intercom was dead, severing all communication within the aircraft. The electrically powered top turret was frozen in place, its guns silent. The controls were heavy and sluggish, the plane barely responding to Brown's commands. Most devastatingly, the human cost was immense. The tail gunner, Sergeant Hugh Ecke Eckenrode, was dead at his post. The nose gunner was critically wounded and unconscious. The co-pilot had a shrapnel wound in his shoulder. Another crew member had a leg nearly severed and was bleeding profusely. The radio operator was wounded, and the interior of the bomber was a scene of horror, splattered with blood and oil, the freezing wind howling through the gaping holes. Ye Olde Pub. Bleeding fuel, altitude, and men fell out of the protective formation. It became a lone, crippled beast, slowly and painfully struggling toward what they hoped was the safety of the North Sea and then, miraculously, England. It was a dying plane, a sitting duck, limping across the German countryside, each mile a small victory. This was the scene of devastation that greeted Franz Stigler. Alerted to a lone wounded bomber, Stigler scrambled in his Bf 109. For a pilot of his caliber, finding the struggling B-17 was easy. It was the easiest victory of his career, a certain kill that would edge him closer to his Knight's Cross. He could already envision the confirmation. He maneuvered into a classic firing position behind and below the bomber's vulnerable belly, his finger resting on the trigger button that would unleash his cannons. He waited for the bomber's dorsal gunner to open fire, which would give him the gunner's exact position and allow for a precise killing burst. But no shots came. The bomber flew on, a ghost ship. Puzzled and now wary of a trap, he edged closer. He flew alongside the massive bomber, so close that the wings of his small fighter nearly touched the fortress's vast wingspan. It was an incredibly risky maneuver, putting him in the blind spot of any remaining guns. And then he saw it. Through the gaping holes torn by cannon shells, he saw the carnage inside. He saw the American crew, some no older than boys, huddled around their wounded comrades, trying to stanch the bleeding with makeshift bandages. He saw the fear, exhaustion, and determination on their young faces. He looked toward the tail and saw the dead gunner, his body slumped in his harness, a stark monument to the battle's cost. The sound of the wind whistling through the shattered bomber replaced the roar of battle in his mind. In that moment, the war faded away. The Knight's Cross, the fatherland, the ideology, all of it vanished. Stigler later recalled, "It was like a badly wounded soldier carrying a stretcher with a wounded man on it. You don't shoot at them." He thought of Rodel's words, which echoed in his conscience. To shoot this plane down would be no act of heroism. It would be murder. It would be a betrayal of the code that made him who he was. But his decision was fraught with mortal peril. To let an enemy bomber escape was treason. If he landed without firing his cannons, the evidence of unused ammunition would be clear to his ground crew and commanders. He could be court-martialed and shot for failing in his duty. He was caught between his humanity and his duty as a soldier. Stigler made his choice. He would not fire, but his duty to life was not yet done. He knew the bomber would have to pass over the heavy anti-aircraft batteries near the German coast. A plane in this state would be instantly annihilated by the accurate ground fire. Flying wingtip to wingtip with the B-17, Stigler now tried to signal the American pilot. He gestured frantically, pointing down toward the ground, urging Brown to land and surrender. It was their only chance for survival. Inside the old pub, the crew was in a state of shock and terror. They had seen the German fighter approach. They saw the pilot, close enough to make out his face. They saw the black crosses on his wings. They braced for the final lethal attack that would send them all to their deaths. When it didn't come, they couldn't understand why. Brown, looking out his window, saw the German pilot gesturing. He misinterpreted the signal, believing Stigler was demanding they surrender. Brown shook his head. No. He would try for home. He would not abandon his wounded and dead crewmates to a POW camp. He would risk everything for the chance to bring them all back. Seeing the Americans' refusal, Stigler faced another choice. He could leave them to their fate, his conscience clear that he had not fired the killing blow, or he could see them through the most dangerous part of their journey. He chose the latter. He positioned his Bf-109 off the B-17's wing, so close that the German ground gunners would recognize him as an escort and hold their fire. He was using his own plane, his own life, as a shield for his enemies. It was an act of unimaginable courage and moral conviction. For miles, he guided the crippled bomber over the German coastal defenses. As they reached the open water of the North Sea, Stigler knew his protection was at an end. He could go no further. He pulled one last time alongside the cockpit. He looked at Charlie Brown, and the two enemy pilots made eye contact across the divide. It was a moment suspended in time. Stigler, the German ace, came to a position of attention in his cockpit and saluted the American rookie. Brown, stunned and bewildered, did not return the gesture, his mind struggling to process the impossible events. Then, with a final bank of his wings, the German pilot turned his fighter away and disappeared, leaving the Americans to their desperate, seemingly impossible flight home. The ordeal for Brown and his crew was not over. They faced a harrowing flight over the North Sea, navigating by dead reckoning, with damaged instruments, constantly on the verge of ditching into the freezing water. Against all odds, they managed to nurse their shattered plane across the sea and perform a wheels-up crash landing at a coastal RAF base in Norfolk, England. The aircraft skidded to a halt, a total wreck, but the crew, miraculously, had survived. When a debriefing officer asked Brown how he managed to get home, he told the truth. He recounted the entire story, including the German pilot who had spared them. The response was not celebration, but disbelief and deep suspicion. In the context of total war, his story was incomprehensible. An official investigation was launched, not to celebrate their survival, but to determine if Brown had colluded with the enemy or abandoned his post. The story was deemed so incredible and potentially damaging to morale that it was classified and ordered never to be discussed. The men of Ye Old Pub were scattered to other units, and the event became a buried, secret memory, a ghost that haunted Brown for decades. Franz Stigler also said nothing. He never logged the encounter. He simply reported that he had been unable to down the B-17, a statement that, while technically true, concealed the profound act of mercy at its core. He went on to fight, surviving the war as one of the few last aces, and eventually emigrated to Canada in 1953, building a new life, but always carrying the memory of that day with him. For Charlie Brown, who left the Air Force, earned a university degree, and eventually rejoined the military for a long career that included a stint in Vietnam, the memory was a persistent ghost. He could never forget the face of the German pilot who had saved him and his crew. The weight of that unacknowledged debt grew heavier with time. Finally, in 1986, retired and living in Miami, he decided he had to find the man. He began a seemingly hopeless quest, writing letters to former Luftwaffe pilots' associations and placing ads in newsletters, asking if anyone knew of a pilot who had spared a B-17 near Bremen on December 20th, 1943. One of those letters found its way to Franz Stigler, now living in Vancouver, Canada. He immediately knew which mission it was. There had only been one. He wrote back to Brown with a simple, powerful confirmation. I was the one. In 1990, 47 years after their fateful encounter, the two men met again at a reunion of the 379th Bomb Group. When Brown saw Stigler, he strode across the room and embraced the man who had been his nemesis and his savior. They were not former enemies. They were brothers, bound by a secret that had shaped their lives. They discovered they had more in common than they could have ever imagined. They both loved aviation, they valued honor and duty, and they had carried the weight of that single, defining day for nearly 5 decades. Their friendship was immediate and profound. They began traveling together, telling their story at air shows and to historians, a living testament to the power of mercy. They co-wrote a book, A Higher Call, with author Adam Makos, ensuring their incredible story would be preserved for future generations. They became as close as family, their bond forged in the crucible of war and tempered by an act of grace. They often spoke together on the phone, their conversations filled with the easy comfort of old friends. When asked why he did it, why he risked everything for the enemy, Franz Stigler's answer was always simple and profound. I didn't have the heart to finish those brave men, he said. I flew next to them for a long time. They were trying to save their aircraft, just like I would have tried to save mine. How could I shoot at them? It would be like shooting at a man in a parachute. Charlie Brown passed away in 2008. Franz Stigler, his faithful friend, followed him in 2009. They are buried a few hours' drive apart in the countries they each called home. Their story endures as one of the most remarkable of World War II, a stark reminder that even when nations are locked in total war, the choice to see the human in your enemy is a power that never dies. It is the story of the sniper who spared his prey and in doing so found not just a saved soul, but a brother for life. In a century of violence, their legacy is a quiet, enduring monument to the notion that our humanity is a choice we must make every day, even when it is the hardest thing in the world to do.